Welcome to Singularity Watch, a show where we look into the future, keeping our eyes wide open. I'm Ollie, and as always, my co-host is cybersecurity expert Kavya Perlman, founder of the XR Safety Initiative, XRSI. Hey, Kavya.
Hey, Ollie. Hey, everyone.
Today, we talk about games, and we do it with a person who's been developing experiences for a long, long time, from Disney's theme parks to MMORPGs and VR games.
His name is Jesse Schell, and I can't wait to teleport and start.
But today, I'm going to trade my seat with a man that's usually behind the scenes, behind the camera, and making this show work. A gaming enthusiast and a great journey companion, Tim Stifler-Dean.
We're going to dive right into the deep questions, Jesse. And we want to start with the Netflix docuseries High Score, if you're familiar with it. At the beginning of the first episode, Howard Scott Warshaw, he says, as a game designer, it's not about what I'm putting on the screen, and it's not about what's in my design. It's about what's going on in the head of the player. What do you think about this statement?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, games are nothing all by themselves. A game is an inert object if nobody plays it. If it just sits there and isn't played, it's almost like it doesn't exist. And we don't really care about games as designers. We're not creating games because games are something we care about. We're trying to create human experiences, and games can foster and encourage certain kinds of experiences. And so we kind of create the games in order to create the experiences. But really all we care about is the experiences. If I could just go into people's minds and just help and create experiences directly, I would do that. But you can't. But games are a great way to be able to do that. So yeah, no, I think the creator of Yar's Revenge is right on.
Yeah, he's certainly got a lot of that experience under his belt to know exactly what he is looking for. And I love what you said there. It's about the experiences. What kind of experiences are you looking for?
In terms of the kinds of experiences to create, there's so many different possibilities. There's so many options, but usually I know what I like to focus on are experiences that people can't have in their ordinary lives. That's what people are looking for out of games, ways to have experiences that kind of take them out of who they normally are and what they normally do. And those can be kind of physical experiences, social experiences, experiences of kind of puzzle solving and success. There's so many ways you can do it. And the ones I like best are the ones that help you become a better version of yourself.
Oh, I love that. Awesome.
That's great. So Jesse, as you teach game design and building virtual worlds at Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center since 2002. So you're deeply into the idea of games themselves. If you had to choose a title for docuseries about video games, would you have gone with High Score as well? I mean, is that the idea that summarizes the concept behind games?
Oh, I mean, High Score is a fine title because it kind of it points to it speaks of aspiration in the world of video games. I think it's a totally reasonable title. Certainly not every
one.
Right. Yeah. Not every game is about scoring, of course, but every game is about some kind of aspiration of trying to do something, trying to be something. I think that's true for just about every game.
Right.
Yeah, and I love that video games, like every other form of communication or art, it is about creating, it is about experiencing, it is about aspiring to something more, and it's strongly related to the audience, like you said. It's particularly important to think about the age of your audience. So what are your key principles when it comes to age-appropriate design in gaming?
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, thinking about people's ages is really important because age is one of the things that defines what people are aspiring for and what they're trying to do and what they're interested in, not to mention how they communicate and who they want to connect with. So it's a lot of it is just understanding the psychology of where people are when they're at different ages. So, you know, we obviously have a lot of different segments when we talk about children, and children's age ranges are very much defined by brain growth, right? You'll often hear people talk about, well, you've got the sort of 0 to 2, and then you've got 2 to 5, and then you've got 5 to 7, and then you've got 7 to 9, and 9 to 12. And those aren't made up numbers. We don't say 7 to 9 arbitrarily instead of saying 8 to 10, right? We say that because there are very specific points at which there is brain growth. You can go back 2,000 years, and people use the phrase, they talk about age 7 as the age of wisdom, because certain brain growth happens right around that age that lets you start to reason and discuss things in a way that a 5 or 6-year-old just simply isn't capable of. So when you're younger, the games you aspire toward are very dominated by where your brain is. As you get older, it changes because your brain stops going through these growth phases at about age 23. So obviously we see big changes into the teenage years. Teenagers are interested in communicating in ways that they haven't before, and they're interested in experimenting with identity in ways that younger people have been less interested in. And then older people, everything is dominated much more, not by brain growth, because now the brain is kind of stable, but it's dominated much more by who they want to interact with. Is it about that they want to interact with their family, that they want to interact with their friends, that they're trying to do something kind of personal for self-care, and that they need a respite from all of their social responsibilities? There's a lot to focus on there. And then one of the things that I think people don't think about enough is designing for multiple age groups to interconnect. So people talk about the principles of games for children, but very few people talk about the principles of games for families, because designing a game for families is very different. I'd had a lot of experience on a game called Toontown Online, which was one of the first MMOs for kids. And we very intentionally not only tried to use the psychology of children and the way they connect and the way they interact so they could connect with each other, but also the psychology of inter-family communication, so that there would be easy ways and convenient ways and comfortable ways for families to kind of connect with each other through the technology. So it's something you have to think about all the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's super fascinating. And as a member of the Child Safety Initiative at XRSI, the child safety side and player safety side is very important to me. And I wonder a lot about the design principles that go in and are targeted towards parents and making parents feel comfortable either engaging in the game with their child or letting their child play freely. Do you have any aspect of, when you're designing and developing these games, building something with those parents in mind who are concerned for the safety of their children?
Yeah, I mean, safety, when you're designing anything for children, safety always needs to be paramount, right? Partly because it makes the parents feel better, but also partly it's just your ethical responsibility, right? Most of the time when you're making a game, you don't worry, oops, if I do it wrong, someone's going to die. But when you're making social games for children, if you do it wrong, someone's going to die. And you have to think about that. I remember when we first started working on Toontown, in order to kind of help ourselves focus on this and to make sure we were being really responsible, we had one of the artists draw a cover of Time magazine for the week that someone show us what the cover is going to look like when the first time someone gets kidnapped because we made a mistake in our game. And we all looked at that because we wanted to remember that was the responsibility that we had in our hands. So when people think about safety, they think about, we need to protect people from language. But language isn't going to hurt anybody. Language might be awkward or uncomfortable or weird, but it's not going to hurt anybody. What's going to hurt people is children who don't understand they shouldn't be giving out personal information to a dangerous person, and that dangerous person kind of encounters them in real life. So however you do it, you have to take these things very seriously. When we'd made Toontown back in the day, it was definitely the foremost concern. When I'd first gone to the Walt Disney Company and said, "Hey, MMOs, this is a great thing for families," they said, "Oh no, it can't be because of safety." And if we could have taken that as a rejection, but instead we said, "Okay, what I hear you saying is if we can make it safe, you might be interested in doing this." And they said, "Well, okay, I don't know if you can figure that out, but if you can, then yeah." And we created ways to make it safe. Systems of, I guess, multiple systems. I could talk about that stuff for days. But as we're moving into the realm of, so we're moving into the realm of voice chat. It's a very different situation and a lot more challenging than it used to be.
Yeah, so all right, Jesse, I'm going to now ask you some, very easy-ish, but maybe polarizing questions. Let's see if you can recall this, but sure. So what's the first game you played? Ever played?
The first video game or any kind of game?
First game. Yeah, board game, video game, any game that had like a deep impact on you.
Oh boy. I've been playing games my whole life, and I almost feel like every game I played made some kind of impression on me, because I was just always fascinated by games of all kinds. I remember the first time playing Avalon Hill war games with my father when I was a kid, and those were absolutely fascinating. Even just simple little board games, board games, card games, all of those things really, really intrigued me growing up. My friends and I were always making new ones. And one that I think one of my really formative experiences, I was maybe 7 years old. My brother was maybe 4 years old, something like that. We were about those ages. And he wakes up one morning and he says, I played a card game in my dream, and we should play it right now. And it was this game called Thunder, and it was all about getting twos, and twos ended up multiplying your powers. And just the whole idea that you could make up a new game in a dream and then play it in the real world. That was just a moment I always remember and think about, because making new games is just so much fun. And I was lucky to live during the 70s and 80s, when we went from a time where video games didn't exist to suddenly they were everywhere. Suddenly we had arcade games, and we had game consoles, and we had home computer games, and there were 20 kinds of home computer games. 20 times about home computers with all these different kinds of games. And then modems showed up, and just being able to live through all of that invention has just been very exciting. And of course, the invention isn't stopping. One of my big hobbies is juggling. I used to be a professional juggler, and I would work with various troupes, and I worked with magicians. And when I look at all the things I've been interested in over the years, it's things that seem magical. And game design is so magical, because you go from just nothing. You go from I've just got some cards or little bits of cardboard or whatever, or just a computer, which could be the most boring thing in the world. And you create these entire fantasy worlds that people engage with emotionally and deeply in their minds. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to work on. I spent the morning today, the first thing I woke up thinking about was, could you make a game where you drive an ice cream truck? And what would that game even be like? It's just so fun to be able to think about things like that.
The word game is almost inappropriate these days, because it's so much more than a game, right? There's so much that goes into it. But so Kavya and I, we've got a list of questions here, and we kind of want to bounce these back and forth and try and do a ping pong sort of thing, or pong.
All right, I'm ready.
So rapid fire, and let's see what you can tell us about yourself with a few of these questions.
All right.
Is there a video game you would like to forget about just to be able to play it again?
Oh, a game to discover all over again.
Yeah.
I think Portal or Portal 2. Probably Portal 2. Yeah, that was just so fun exploring every little bit of that. Another one I think of was Blast Core on the N64. If people know that game, I fell deeply in love with that game and squeezed all the juice out of it, and I would love to be able to do that again.
I quote Cave Johnson all the time. Yeah, Cave Johnson, the combustible lemons. Kavya.
Yes, so is there a video game you would like to forget about and never touch anymore?
Oh, just in terms of a game that I wish I could never have to know about again. Boy, I don't know. I don't know if I would like that because there's lessons to be learned out of every game. I don't know. I don't know if I have any game like that because even the worst, most horrible game, you don't want to forget it because you don't want to make those mistakes again, and you want to warn people away from those mistakes. Definitely. I can certainly think about games I've worked on where I'm like, I wish we'd gone a different direction. I wish we'd kind of, done something different. But at the same time, like, that's how you learn.
Fair enough. So let's get more personal. What's the best video game that you've ever created?
The best video game that I've ever created. Man, that's a tough question because it depends on what you mean by best. I think in a lot of ways, Toontown might be that game. We've had such an intense focus on creating a social experience, and there were an awful lot of things that it feels like we did right in that game. At the same time, I look at I Expect You to Die, which is our VR, puzzle solving game. And that thing is done so well. And I've been able to take 20 years of VR experience and kind of help channel it into that. And we've had such a beautiful team working on that. So, and I feel like we did a ton right in there. But it's a tough call because, everything you work on, there's something that you love about it.
That's true.
Yeah. So many people say that the most difficult object to create in a video game is a door. What is your nightmare object?
I don't know if doors are that bad. I mean, I get what people are talking about that I sort of with doors, but nightmare objects in video games. Wow. I've got to think about that for a second. I mean, it depends so much on the medium that you're in. Ropes. Yes. Ropes. I know that sounds crazy, but making ropes behave like they do in real life is just something that is surprisingly and weirdly hard. I guess for me, it's the things that you feel like should behave one way and then they don't. So, I mean, when you think about all the things a rope can really do and the way it like wants to bend and the way it wants to flex and the business of tying knots and all of that, like ropes and strings, we just don't know how to do it, and they can lead to disappointment. And I'm always fascinated by the objects we choose to avoid in games because we don't want to deal with them. So we act like they don't exist, right? Like fluid simulation is a thing we just don't do in games, right? Because it's so hard. We ended up making a game all about a chemistry lab. It was a game show set in a chemistry lab where you got to show off your awesome lab skills. And we thought this is going to be a great educational game for VR. And we'll just use all the awesome fluid simulation stuff that must be out there? And the answer was no, people don't do that. We had to invent so much fluid stuff because since it's hard, people don't do it, even though fluids are such a normal part of everyday life. But the whole idea of I'm going to make something where you can do a reasonable simulation of pouring from one glass into another, and with the physics just aren't there. So anyway, yeah, objects that require a lot of physics, those are the ones for me.
Yeah,
it makes sense. I actually don't quite remember seeing a bunch of ropes around
That's right.
VR. Like now that I think of it, and I'm going to be keeping an eye for it.
Ropes are really useful in real life. If you were really going to be an adventurer, you'd want to have ropes all over the place, but we avoid them because we don't want to deal with it.
Exactly. So I don't mean to mark your age, but it seems you graduated in 1994 with a Master's of Science in Computer Networking and Virtual Reality.
Yeah, I'm 50 and 3/4, so yeah.
That's amazing.
Congratulations.
When you think about
Thank you.
and congratulations. Yeah. So now when you think, what we used to call phone in 1994 and what we call phone now, we're referring to two completely different things, right? Or at least even the semantics. So
yeah.
Is that same for VR? So what was the VR? What was VR in 1994?
The crazy part is VR has changed very little in all that time. We still had 6 degree of freedom head trackers, 6 degree of freedom hand trackers. There were more wires, and the computing hardware was a lot more expensive. So, for example, in 1995, when I was working on Disney Quest, we were working on the Aladdin's Magic Carpet VR experience for Disney. We were doing 3D worlds with 3D animated characters. The characters had approximately, 3,000 or 4,000 polygons in them, which isn't that different from what we do now on the Quest. The difference is the hardware we were using cost $500,000. That was what the system cost to run and operate. Whereas now you can get all the same stuff for about $500. So it's interesting that the features aren't that different, but the cost is 1,000 times less. I'm not going to say there's no differences. Certainly, things are lighter, better, cheaper, faster. We have shader algorithms. We have a lot of things that we just didn't really exist before. But the basics of kind of what you do and how you do it, they haven't changed a ton.
Well, that's an interesting point. Is the cost has reduced so much, and has made it more accessible not only to developers but also to consumers. And obviously, in 2020 and in 2021, we're seeing the adoption rate of VR with consumers is going up. But in the 90s, there's great movie, Lawnmower Man, which was, it created enormous hype around a technology that wasn't ready yet. Do you, thinking about the adoption of VR amongst consumers, now that it's more accessible and it's more affordable, there are still challenges and roadblocks in the adoption of VR. Do you think that hype, that same type of hype, is sometimes a roadblock while other things are more accessible with it?
Hype is really normal. Hype is really normal and very human. People get all excited about things because they have an idea of what they're going to be, and then they find out what they really are, right? So, for example, I think of when the iPad was announced. A lot of people are like, oh, this is great. We'll never have laptops again. Right? This is the replacement for the laptop. And people were serious. That was the expectation. This is the next generation of laptop. We won't need laptops anymore. And then it came out and people were like, boo, this is horrible. This doesn't what I thought it was. They hated it. There was real frustration and disappointment in what it was. But then they learned what it really was. And oh, okay, this isn't meant to be a laptop replacement, but it does make it easier to do computing in certain settings, right? It's a way easier to sit on a couch or sit on a bed and read a digital newspaper with this than it is to do that with a laptop. And that kind of fits in my life in a nice way. I can stick this in my, in my purse and kind of pull it out at a different time. So people have to learn what things are and what they are for, and that takes time. I think about technologies like video conference. That was invented in 1950, and then we made it free around the year 2000, and still people weren't using it very much. And it took widespread broadband, and then it took a global pandemic to get people to actually focus on it, use it seriously. And now it's finally here. Okay, great. That only took 70 years to get people to kind of use this technology. And this is just how it goes. People have to find where it fits in their lives. And that's what we're going to see with VR. We're going to see initially, I think, people realizing that, particularly with things with the Quest form factor, that, oh, this is kind of cool that I can play these kind of games, but they're trying to figure out how it fits in their life. And it's a hard technology to show. It's got the same problem DVRs have. DVRs were not a success, TiVo and all that. It took years. It took like 8-10 years for it really to get out there, because if your friend had one, they'd be like, oh, it's cool, you can pause live TV. And you're like, so what? I can record shows. I've got a VCR. I can record shows. Who cares? Right? And it was kind of gradually people were like, oh, I get it. This is a little more convenient to have this. And they started to see what it is. Same thing. You got video gamers now who are like, I don't get it. VR. Why would I want that? Sounds awkward. Sounds uncomfortable. Sounds inconvenient. But you got to try it. And you can't just try it once. You got to kind of spend some time in it. And so people are figuring it out. And I think we're going to see that growth continue to happen. We're seeing it now, and it's going to keep happening.
So Jesse, what can you tell us about the future? I mean, what are the game design trends that people really can't see yet?
Yeah. I mean, So there's a lot of trends going on. So in the VR space, the big one that's coming is social. I mean, here we are in alt space VR, and kind of we're doing this, but in VR, we're going to see this big explosion of social, because there's a magic number in social, which is 10 million. When there's less than 10 million of something, probably none of your friends has it. When there's more than 10 million of something, probably at least one of your friends has it. Right now, in terms of VR headsets, we're in the less than 10 million zone. So for most people, none of their friends have it, so it's not a meaningful social experience for them. Once we cross over, suddenly it's like, oh, wait, one of my friends has it. It's a way to connect with my friends. And so we're going to start to see that happen. And because there's so much power in like social VR, because of this feeling of presence, that's going to start to become a really big deal. So I'm expecting to see around 2025, I think we're going to be seeing that as like a really huge tentpole deal. Like, social VR experiences are going to be a really big thing for people. But some of the other stuff that's coming that people aren't thinking about has to do with AI. We are so close to a tipping point where we're at a place where computers can understand the spoken word, and then the question of, can they understand what we're actually talking about? And then they have to be able to engage in the rhythm of human conversation. So when you look at stuff like Alexa understands your words. Sometimes it understands what you're talking about, but it understands nothing about the rhythm of human conversation. And it's going to be the game developers who have to do this and figure it out. Because once we have that, we're going to be able to have an intimacy with characters that we've never had, where you are able to talk, not like you're giving orders to a dog like you do with Alexa, but you're going to talk with AI characters like you're talking to another person, and they're going to respond like a person does. And that's going to create an emotional experience that I think is going to change the medium of video games in a fundamental way.
That's a mind-blowing concept. I don't know why I never thought of that, going and having a conversation with an NPC, not just clicking a response, but actually saying something to. That's a mind-blowing concept to me. That's very cool.
Yeah,
I had to exclaim that.
Back to Mass Effect 3. That game actually is going to have an important place in the history books, because the way it uses on Xbox, the way it used the voice is fascinating. because it has dialogue trees, and you can do it completely by voice. But what's really interesting is you and the avatar are like a team. So like these choices will come up about what to say, and then you'll say it with your voice. But then you have this question: what should the avatar do? Should the avatar repeat what you just said? Because that's stupid. I just said it, and then he says it. That seems dumb. Or does he stand there and say nothing, and I'm the one who talks, and he just stands there dumbly? And instead, he finishes the sentences for you, right? Because if you say, I don't think, if you say, I don't think we should go over there, he'll say, it'll be too dangerous, right? Like you're a little team. And so this, when I think about where are things going to go, everybody, when you think about AI, everyone imagines NPCs and you chat with the NPCs. But I actually expect a huge amount of our chit chat is going to be with our avatar. And I think it's a weird thing to think about because we don't think about our avatars that way. But I think we are going to start to see that, where the avatar will say, hey, why don't we go over here? And you'll say, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then the two of you will go and do it together. So it's going to be a really interesting time. So I'm looking for that stuff. I think we're going to start to see experiments with that in like 2026, 27. And I think we're going to start to see it really take hold maybe around 2030.
As all of our travel mates, listeners, and watchers know, in every episode we ask our guests to give us his or her own terms of singularity. So Jesse, what does singularity mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the singularity is the time when we can no longer predict the future at all because things are coming at us too fast, right? If you think about it, say you lived in the year 1100, and I asked you to make predictions about the technologies of the far-off year of 1200, you'd probably do okay, actually. It's because technology was moving so slowly then. But if I ask people now to kind of say, tell me about technologies of the year 2100, people really struggle because they can't imagine out that far. And even now, asking people to think about 5 years, 10 years, people struggle. And we're going to get to the point where it's not just, I can't imagine what the world's going to be like in 5 years, 10 years. You'll say, well, I can't imagine it in 1 year. I can't imagine it in 6 months. I can't imagine it in 1 month. I can't imagine tomorrow, because it's going to be coming at us that fast. And I think a lot of that's going to have to do with the redefinition with AI and what AI turns into, and then the intersection with biological technologies, because that's going to force everyone to confront, what does it actually mean to be a human being? And we're going to see those two things happen at once, because we're going to have the biological stuff happening where we can kind of do all this sort of gene manipulation. And then we're going to also have these AIs showing up. And human beings always assume that everything is like a human being. That's just how we are. And so we assume AIs are going to think like human beings, but they don't, because human beings, everything we do is defined by death, right? Everything that we value is about the fact that we're going to die one day, and we got to be careful not to die, and we got to be careful to do this and that before we die. AIs don't care about any of that. And so their way of thinking is going to be completely different. And so it's going to make us realize what it actually means to be human. And a lot of people get weird about it and they get all dystopian, but I think we're going to see a lot of really positive human growth as people start to understand what does it really mean to be a human being.
Wow, that's a fantastic answer. Very very interesting to think about. And I'm gonna have to put you on the spot a little bit, because you mentioned predicting the future. So Jesse, as you said, you are also a performer, a juggler, comedian, and a circus artist. Can you predict the future and tell us, please, when do you think we'll be able to learn juggling in VR?
Oh, that's a great question, juggling in VR. I've been thinking about that a lot. Me and some other jugglers who do VR, we've talked about this, and I've been thinking about doing more with it, because part of the problem is throwing in VR doesn't work right now, because and I think it's just because people haven't thought about the problem enough of like the tactility of throwing and how it actually works and how it wants to work. So I've been wondering, I've actually been thinking seriously about creating, I mean, I've taught thousands of people how to juggle because I've taught workshops in it for years and years. And I think it would be very possible to make a juggling app. But we've got to get the throwing and catching right. And so I partly want to do this experiment just to see, can I teach someone to juggle in VR and then have it transfer to real life? I feel like I could, but we've got to get the throwing right and the motion, the object motion right and correct. There's a lot of details in it about the way that the human mind processes parabolas. I know that sounds crazy, but we have a lot of special stuff in our brains about the way parabolas work and how catching works and how we move our hands. And the advantage you have in VR is you can move objects in slow motion. So many people learn to juggle with using these scarves. And the advantage of the scarves is they move in slow motion in real life. But to be able to gradually shift the speed of the objects moving closer and closer to real-time motion, that could be a way to actually learn juggling very fast. So it's something I'm hoping to explore, but haven't explored yet.
It all comes back to what you were saying earlier with the physics in games and the difficulty
it's
of
tough.
developing them.
Yeah. No, physics and then touch. Those are two things that are really hard. The touch in particular are things we just take so much for granted. You know, it's so invisible to us. We don't even think about like what touch means. And suddenly we have to recreate a thing we've never seen or thought about. And so that's a challenge, but when you get it right, you get it right.
It feels like the industrial age and like the Stone Age at the same time, where we are like reinventing touch and and all of these things.
Yeah.
And we're using this, software as a building material.
Oh, it's a wonderful time for invention. There's so much room for invention. There are so many things that are being created and experimented with now that are just going to be defining the next few decades. And so it really, if you like inventing things, it's a wonderful time to be alive.
Well, Jesse, I am excited to be alive, and I'm excited for seeing the future of what you and your team and everybody that is involved in these projects that you're working on, what you bring out and the experiments that you bring to reality. This has been such an awesome conversation. I'm so privileged and honored to have been able to chat with you today. And thank you so much again for being here.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you both. Thanks so much.
I don't know if it's the same for you, but now I really want to go and play Portal again, just like Jesse told us.
Oh, wait. Before you do that, Ollie, you should just take care of a couple of things, right?
Oh, yes. First of all, I want to thank Tim for leading the show with you, Kavya. Of course, I want to remind all of you that you can find us on readyhackerone.com, on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and all the main podcast platforms. And thanks to Marco, Tim, David, and Crystal for making this show possible. Happy journeys to all of you.
Happy and safe journey.